Hi, my name is Alex Love, and I'm going to be doing my speech on Iron-Jawed Angels, the film. The fight for women's suffrage and equal rights has gone down in history as one of the most influential social movements. The movie Iron-Jawed Angels is a story about Alice Paul and her loyal followers and their fight for equality for women. Now I'm going to talk about just a little summary of the movie. The movie begins by introducing Alice to the National American Women's Suffrage Association in the hopes of gaining support for a protest parade in D.C. Alice gets the approval and heads off to D.C. with her loyal followers. At first, it was hard for Alice to recruit women to march in the parade, but when time came, hundreds of women showed up to protest. The parade then turned violent, but that was a positive thing for the women because it gained publicity. So it was featured in the news, like the parade was, and all the pandemonium from it. Once the news got back to those in charge of the National American Women's Suffrage Association, they were not happy and began looking into what Alice and everyone was up to in D.C. Alice then decided to break off and create the National Women's Party. The National Women's Party was up and running and taking donations when President Wilson declared war. So this kind of put a wrench in their plans. The women were then torn. Do they go on with plans to protest in front of the White House or quit because that would be picketing a wartime president? Some women decided not to, but a few went ahead and protested. Much to their surprise, the women were arrested for obstructing traffic. The women were found guilty and had to pay a $10 fine or serve time in a workhouse. So it was like a workhouse, but it was like a prison where they had to work just with really rough conditions. The women decided that paying the fine would mean they are guilty, and they did not break the law. So one woman stood up and said, "We're not paying the $10 because we didn't do anything wrong, and we're going to fight for what we believe in." The women went off to the workshop and dealt with horrible conditions, but still stood firm in the fact that they did not break the law. Alice and the women went back home. Back home, they continued to protest and were arrested for the same thing and got sent to the same place. So at that point, Alice still fought for the cause. She went down fighting. She decided to not eat and not give what they were feeding her because she didn't do anything wrong. So there was no reason for her to be there. So she wanted to protest that. And then they ended up force feeding her. They put a feeding tube down her nose and down her throat. And then she finally wrote a note that got out to the public. And once that word got out about how horrible the women were being treated, they were set free. Finally, on August 18th, 1920, the women's hard work paid off and equality was granted. And that's kind of how the movie ended. So now I'm going to talk about how this relates back to our course. So the first thing I want to talk about is the parade. So the parade was the very kind of towards the beginning of the movie, and this can be related back to week 1 and week 2. So this was a conventional crowd, an expressive crowd, an acting crowd, and a protest crowd. So a conventional crowd is a crowd that gathers for a specific purpose. So the purpose in this case was the fight for women's equality, women's suffrage. And then it was an expressive crowd because it showed emotions and feelings with the yelling from the men. So in the book it talks about how, well actually in our lecture from the notes, talks about how a conventional crowd often turns expressive. So this was a perfect example of that. So the men saw the women fighting for equality and they decided to push back, fight, yell. They were physically pushing each other, men and women. And then it showed the next morning, and there was just total pandemonium in the streets. You could see there were just like broken bottles. Everything was just everywhere. And this was also an acting crowd, because an acting crowd is one that is violent and has destructive behavior. And like I was just talking about, it actually sent 100 people to the hospital, and there were bottles thrown, so just complete chaos. And it was also a protest crowd. Of course, protest was, they're protesting for a cause, women's suffrage, women's equality. The next part I want to talk about is the creation of the National Women's Party. So the National Women's Party was a breakoff from the National American Women's Suffrage Association, which was created, this party was created by Alice. So there's a quote from the book that fits this perfectly. So it says, this is a direct quote, Each as well holds that before collective action is possible within a collectivity, a generalized belief or ideological justification is necessary concerning at least the causes of the discontent and under certain conditions the modes of redress. That was by McCarthy and Zeldin on page 160. So the generalized belief in this situation would be the equality for all. Both men and women, they said it multiple times. They weren't just fighting for women, they were fighting for everyone to have a say in the government that they were being, that their lives were under, the government that their lives were under. And so the women believed in the right and wanted the change. So, and the modes of redress in this situation would be not having a voice. So, like I was just talking about, they wanted a voice in the government that they had to answer to. So, that's how that direct quote went to the National Women's Party. And the tactic that the National Women's Party used, they used tactical strategy. So the tactical strategy in the book, it's described as using bargaining, persuasion, or violence to influence authorities to change. And that's on page 162 by McCarthy and Zold. The tactical strategies they used was making friends with someone in the Washington Post, the lady on the horse speaking. So there was a lady that was really their symbol, and she actually ended up passing away in the movie, but she was a prominent figure in the image of the National Women's Party. And the bargaining at the gala. So it showed a gala with senators and the women of the National Women's Party. They went and tried to get donations, get their word out, persuade senators to be on their side and fight along with them for equality for all. Next, I want to talk about posting outside the White House. And this this is a protest crowd like I talked about at the beginning. And so this can go back to chapter 10 with collective empowerment. And so this is also a direct quote from the chapter 10. While recruits may gain a sense of potential power of a movement in consciousness, raising sessions, the real test for the movement comes at the actual protest site, where all involved see how many are willing to take the risk associated with challenging authority. So they were definitely challenging authority when they went outside the White House, and they took a big risk, especially when picketing a wartime president. So the people believe that they should take it easy on the president because he's having a hard time with declaring war. So they felt like they should support him as opposed to protesting against him. And they were risking picketing a wartime president, and they were challenging police officers and military. So they didn't believe, the military and some of the police officers, they didn't believe what they were doing was right. We see that when the women were wrongfully arrested. So they were also challenging their authority. Next, I want to talk about the resilience of the women. Throughout the entire movie, the resilience of the women never wavered. Regardless of being shot down by the women in the National American Women's Suffrage Association to being arrested, the women still knew to fight for what they believe in. The book talks about passion during social movements and how eating, sleeping, singing, and spending time together can strengthen the bond. We see this a lot whenever we saw them in the workplace. It wasn't a prison, but it pretty much felt like it. They supported each other. When Alice didn't eat, the rest of them didn't eat. When one woman's hands were tied up, they all kind of stood in the jail cell with their hands tied up. These women had passion and courage that should be respected by everyone. So this movie was kind of hard for me to watch. I never knew that something like, I knew about the suffrage, that movement, of course, it's a huge part of history, but I never knew the conditions that some women went through. So this movie taught me a lot and really showed me that if you really believe in something, some things are worth dying for, like Alice was going to starve herself to death. So overall, this movie showed that with true passion and resilience, social change can happen. It taught to never give up even when things get hard and stand true to what you believe in. Lastly, it taught to stay loyal to those who stay loyal to you. Support during a social movement is crucial and can make all the difference. And I also wrote about that on one of my discussion posts. I remember that support in a social movement means everything, because while one person can make a difference, a ton of people with that same goal can even make a bigger impact. So this movie definitely related back to the course in many ways. I really did enjoy the movie. It kind of opened my eyes to what our history is, and just how big of an impact people can make regardless of circumstances, and how many people will fight for what they believe in. So it really made me think about what I believe in, what I would die for, what I would fight for. So that is the end of my speech. Thank you.